Welcome to Super Meat World. Into this update, we're gonna play a chapter entitled Remnants. Again? Well, not quite, because this time around, we're gonna play the Dark World version of it. It's Remnants Dark World. Oh, and remember how come the first level was titled Route 1, here it's called Rough 1. Ho 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 ho. But anyway, this chapter was made once again by Code92, and as an interesting turn of event, while the original chapter was finished in March 2011, this Dark World version was made and released in October. Yeah, that's 7 months later. But hey, as the saying goes, better late than never, because it's still a pretty worthy addition to Super Meat World, even though that this chapter has its shares of up and downs. The main problem with this chapter is that there's quite a lot of the redesigns into the chapter which really fall flat on their face. For instance, I really like how come you had all kinds of fading platforms everywhere into this one level and you had to time your jumps really well, but here they removed them entirely. And in fact they did the exact same thing here. But this time around there's even less to the level. In fact, I don't even know if this level is even harder than the Light World version of it. I mean, into the Light World version, I remember having a few problems beating it because I was trying to go too fast in it, and when you're trying to go too fast, you basically fall through the moving platforms, and you'd need to go through them at a certain speed and rate, but here it's pretty straightforward. There's just a bunch of levels into the chapter which really don't do much imaginative things with the redesign, but this is the first level in the lot which I really think that improve on the original level design. Here it's a lot harder because the jumps are a lot narrower and more difficult to pull off, but yeah, the rest of the level is pretty much the same. This is one of the levels that I really liked into the original chapter, and into this one instance, the level is a lot better. And I really like how come some of the levels into the chapter look brighter than they did into the original version. I mean, it's supposed to be the Dark World version, but yeah, sometimes you have really bright and colorful skies. Okay, maybe not here, but this entire chapter cannot be all sunshine and birds. This is another level in which they change most of the level layout. I mean, the basic premise of the level is exactly the same, but they did change the 2 obstacle courses that you have to go through in order to get the keys. This will be a really good level if it wasn't for one little oversight that the author has done into this one level. Namely, the way that you finish it. Yep, why do you need to go through the level at all? Because you can simply do this. And the most puzzling thing is, in the original level, you couldn't even do that. The ledge above the exit was much longer into the original level, and therefore it was impossible to do a corner jump in order to be able to finish the level faster. To me, this is another big problem that this chapter has. It really doesn't feel as if there's been too much playtesting done on it. Mind you, the levels all play well, and for the most part they're really fun to play, but there's a lot of little things there and there which really makes it as if the author didn't really entirely think about the way that people will play through these levels. Oh, and this chapter also has incredible names for some of the levels. For instance, this level was called Poop. Now, I wasn't a huge fan of this level because of all of the backtracking that you had to do through this level, but this level changes the entire level layout in order to make it so that there's barely any backtracking. This level is infinitely better than the original level was. And also the wall sliding that you have to do up there, up the moving platform, is also really nice. Meat Boy has class. Well, too bad that we cannot say the same about the level names, because first we had Poop and now we have Vomit. The other subsequent names that we're gonna see into this one chapter will be Zits, Pimple, Rash, Gonorrhea, and finally, Bursting Diarrhea of the Devils. No wait, because I will want to play a level titled this. I'm not really sure how we'll enjoy the looks of it, but I probably will want to see it, just because I'm a curious, weird fellow. This level was pretty hard into the original version of the chapter, but here it's a lot more difficult, because you have a whole lot more saw blades to contend with, and it's really easy to fuck up the race to the upper part there, because you really don't have that much time. Also, interestingly enough, even though that the background for the level is entirely, well, white, blue, and pretty bright in overall, well, the entire level is so dark and black. Which is kind of a weird contrast, but then again, you're pretty much in the weirdest place possible where everything can happen. In the original chapter, this was the first level which I thought was genuinely difficult, but here it's even harder. In fact, this is also the turning point where the chapter also starts getting more difficult. Because on a difficulty standpoint, Dark World Remnants is not really that hard. I mean, it's a difficult chapter without any doubt, but compared to most other chapters that I've been playing lately, this one will pretty much be a walk in the park. But yeah, once again, I really feel that some of the levels kind of lose some of the ingenuity that there was into the initial level layout, as in you had to walk through the entire log gate and back and forth while it opens beneath your feet and you're racing in a frenetic manner, but here the level has been entirely changed in order to be a more straightforward affair. Okay, get the key already! I'm not too sure what I was thinking about here, but yeah, even though okay, yeah, sometimes... oh my god! After having such a close call, obviously I had to die in the most idiotic way possible, because I wall slided into the spikes, because they're a little bit too large, and basically, if you hug the wall, once that you get to the level of the spikes, you die. I really tend to dislike spikes into this game, because most of the time they're usually tucked in improperly through the walls, and just slightly touching them makes it so that you die. But yeah, at least you get some pretty tricky jumps every once in a while. I'm just really saddened by the fact that there aren't any more rotating saw blades throughout the game, because they only appear into the forest and the hand tile sets, so you barely get to see them. Here's another level in which I thought they pretty much removed entirely all of the things that made the original level design look any kind of interesting and fun. Into the original level you had to race against all of the disappearing blocks and all of this, but here they removed it entirely, and honestly it makes the level feel a little bit empty. Not to mention that you have a whole lot of backtracking to do this time around, so this level is pretty much inferior to the original in every possible way. And they didn't even have many obstacles neither, so okay, what the hell? Either be more difficult or be more easy or something, but come on, make up your mind already. Here's another level in the chapter which I find kinda questionable, because barely anything is being changed here. You just play the original level, but backwards. And in turns, this makes it so that the level is a million times more tedious because of this part. Yep, it's really fun to wait around while there's absolutely nothing happening. Okay, the ending part here has been changed a bit because the key is now placed in between the two saw blades, and you have to do a precise fall through them in order to be able to collect the key, but other than that, there's not a whole lot which has changed into this place. The hardest thing that you have to do into this one level is to catch the moving platform on time, because you have to be really fast, and having to wait for it is no fun, so you really gotta be fast in order to make it so that the level is any kind of enjoyable. But didn't the original level also had a black background? Because, yeah, if so, it's pretty much the same thing. Definitely not the most glorious moment of the chapter. In fact, this is probably the least interesting redesign that has been done for the chapter. If only due to this one part where you have to wait around a whole lot while nothing is happening. This one redesign, however, is pretty neat, I gotta say. The original level of the chapter was probably the most boring level of the entire chapter, because there was a ton of backtracking to be done through the same ground over and over again. And finally, there was not a whole lot of things which were difficult in terms of obstacles, but this level pretty much solves every issue that I had with the original level, because the backtracking has been mercifully cut down to only one going back to the beginning of the level in order to be able to access to the end. It's not as if you had to go back to the beginning of the level, to the end, finally back to the beginning, and another place where you have to go in order to finish it. But unfortunately, it's time to bring back our good old friend, lack of playtesting, because you might have guessed it looking at the level design, but here it's time that we bring back the one biggest flaw of this one level. Once again, criminally overlooked shortcut to the rescue. Once again, this was a shortcut that was not in the original level layout, so this was added into this one version of the level, so once again, the author unfortunately kind of overlooked some details into this one level. Once again. At least this one level is also pretty good too. It's a good redesign, as in they didn't throw away all of the things that made the original level good, and finally it's harder and definitely more so. This one jump is by far the hardest part of the entire level. And obviously you probably spotted that there's one entire platform which has been removed, so your jump has to be even tighter at the beginning part of this level. So the trick of doing this one final jump in order to get the key is to wait until the saw blade is on the other side of where you are. This will allow you to do the jump properly, and finally you have to do another tricky jump in order to get up here. You can salvage things if you fail, but most of the time you'll end up falling on the one saw blade which is below if you're not careful enough. Oh boy, return of the jumps over really tiny blocks. This was a level that I didn't like into its original shape, but here it's even more obnoxious because there are times where you're simply wondering where the hell you're going. In fact, this is gonna be even more apparent right here. I mean, you have to jump to that one block up there where there's a saw blade, but you cannot jump high enough. How the hell do you... Okay, there's a block here. Thank you, because I really thought at 1 second it was a scenery detail, like, I don't know, some sort of crate or oil drum or something. It could have been anything, but it's really not clear that it's ground. Mainly because you didn't have to do that in the original level. At least I'm a fan of the look of the level. It really looks neat with the bright yellow sky and finally everything being darkened to the point of being not possible to recognize at all. This is pretty ominous, and in a good way. I just really like some of the effects and the looks of some of the levels that they do, because they're usually so contrasted and pretty much the opposite of each other, so it really looks good. This level is black? Well, absolutely, because it has to be this way. No time to assume why it will contrast against the entire thing, and well, you get the picture. This one level, at least they removed the one obnoxious part about the level, because there's no longer that one moving elevator which is glitched out and doesn't carry you properly, but in return that makes it so that you have to do a really tricky jump. Oh, and by the way, you're not reading the timer wrong, because even though we're halfway done with the video, and yet you might have noticed, but there's only 5 levels left. Well, of course it is, because the 5 last levels of the chapter is where Dark World Remnants decides to be an utter dick. Not only the levels are really long, but they're also a whole lot harder. With that said, this one level is pretty tame compared to the rest. This is definitely not the most brutal level of the bunch. In fact, it's only the beginning part and this one part right here which are difficult. The rest is pretty straightforward. In fact, you have to do this one jump over the fast saw blade only once, whereas in the original level you had to do it twice. So here we go, this chapter is once again bringing us the concept of doing really precise jumps as well as good hair control. Yes, you gotta ensure that no hair is growing out of your parts. What the fuck was even that? I really don't know. I really don't know what to say about some of these levels anymore. I really despise this level, however, because this level, for starters, is way too long. But you gotta appreciate the beginning part where you have to time your run really well in order to deal with the crumbling floors, the moving saw blades, as well as the one rotating saw blade. But this is one of the things which I really hate. Yeah, instead of having to fall through a tiny rectangle and you push a switch in order to be free, well, no, instead you have to climb your way out of a giant rectangle which stretches on for miles. I already found that the original level added problems with backtracking, but this one level goes way too far with that. Not to mention that it's pretty tricky to... Oh my god, why did I do that? Why did I do... Oh my god, yeah, I'm just gonna fast forward to that one point where I go because nobody wants to see me climb all the way out of this giant rectangle every single time. Not only it's really long, but it's not even hard to do. In fact, the hardest part of the level is right here. Now, I will fast forward all the way back to the point where I last died, but since this is gonna be my successful run, at least everybody ought to see it, even though the most boring part has to be left in for some reason. The main reason why this section of the level is so hard is that the middle rotating saw blade doesn't move in sync with the other two. You might see that the upper and downward saw blades rotate in unison, but the middle one is a little bit slower, so the timing is entirely different, and you gotta wait around in order to find out the proper timing in order to go between the one saw blade. Okay, so I've said I've despised the level, and even then I'm giving it 5 stars. Come on, you gotta adjust this scale in order to reflect the true rating of this one level. Okay, or maybe I won't, because for some reason this level was magnificent, even though I've said the contrary right now. Okay, I guess this is more like it. This level is a mixed blessing. On the flip side, there are some sections in it which are really harder than the original level were, but at the same time, it removes the hardest part of the entire level, which was that one corner jump that you had to do after collecting the key in order to go back to the beginning. But rest assured, they changed it by something which is far harder to overcome. On the flip side, it means backtracking, but at the same time, I don't really mind it because it's a legitimately difficult section, and in the least, I find that it adds something to the level itself. Yeah, you have to push this switch, and you have to go all the way back to the part where you first were in order to get the key. And finally, you're not afforded to waste any kind of time, because time is short. Whoops. That really wasn't the proper way to do this jump. But this one section is harder because, as you might have noticed, they added a one saw blade here in order to make it so that you cannot immediately drop to the part where you'll usually be safe from the saw blade. Alright, we're gonna push this button once again for feeling, and we're gonna hurry through this because we know that we don't have a whole lot of time. Yeah, case in point, even though that I didn't really waste that much time, I still came short, so we're gonna have to be even faster, and in fact, I'm probably sure that I already screwed up, but here we go. This is the one part where I'm not gonna screw up. At least I hope so, because, well, this level is still pretty hard, so there's absolutely nothing which is winnable ahead of time. The best way to start this run is to do a wall jump right here, because this will allow you to simply do not slow down at all in order to go through this. Yeah, this time around I was pretty ahead of time, and yeah, you can see that this one jump is a whole... Oh my god, are you kidding me? Dying on the final obstacle like this, like a... Oh my god! I really hate this chapter at time, because it makes your crushing defeat even more painful. Okay, so why the hell did I have that much troubles with this one part where you have to race for the fading blocks before they reappear again? Because every single time I've made it all the way here, I was clearly ahead of time without any kind of doubt. But the other times it didn't even look as if I was even close of succeeding. Oh well, them's the break. So yeah, I was not kidding when I said that the last few levels of the chapter were going to be pretty long, didn't I? This is one level in the chapter which I didn't really find to be that hard into the original version of the level, and while the same still applies, at least the level is significantly harder, and with stunts like these I'm certainly not gonna make things any easier on myself. But truth be told, it's also been a very long time since I've played this one chapter. I've only played it back when it first came out. I'm not even sure if I finished the chapter back then, because I kind of was underwhelmed by this chapter at first, because I didn't really think as if the chapter did proper justice to the original, but I figured I might as well just show it, because in the end it's still a pretty worthy chapter, but it's just not as good as it could have been. And since I want the videos to be as authentic as possible into the experience of playing them, I figure no practice, because we gotta do this right off the cuff. And even there you've seen that the level really isn't all that difficult. With the exceptions of my early screw-ups, which honestly didn't make any kind of sense, the level was not very hard. The beginning of the final level is bullshit, because there's absolutely no way that you'll guess right off the bat that you have to go to the sides of the level and you have to grab that one key before it destroys all of the blocks. And finally, you have to wait a whole lot at the beginning of the level each time that you play it, because this is a quirk of the engine, because every single time that there are keys in front of a block, well, or on top of it, well, it doesn't start breaking the blocks automatically. It takes some time. This was a quirk that was pointed out into the video of the chapter The Passenger, and Rockley Smile did a much better implementation of going around this limitation of the engine by making you do other things while you're waiting for the key to unravel, but here you're doing absolutely nothing, which really isn't all that cool. With the exception of the starting point of the level, the rest of this level is pretty cool, and I really like how come it caps off the chapter. It's not a huge increase of difficulty from the original level, but it's still a pretty worthy way to end the chapter. And obviously, after all of the time that, well, I made it through the entire end of the level, obviously, it shall come as no surprise that it takes me forever to get back to the point where I last died. But hey, at least we gotta grant the developer some credit. The annoying part of the level is right at the beginning, and not, say, the middle or the total end of the level, because the rest of the level is not all that hard. I mean, it's harder than the original level, but not by a lot. With that said, however, the sky probably should have been of a other color other than being entirely black like that. It just feels a little bit too much like the Dark World, the end level, and while it's a pretty good way of being adamant about the difficulty of the level and its relevance into the entire scheme of things, well, there were many levels into the chapter where the coloring was done in a much more creative way. Oh, and finally they don't have the 100 murder or meter dash, as you might call it. Instead, you just have a whole bunch of fiendish jumps to do, all back and forth through the tiny saws. With that said, this is pretty easy. As long as you take your time, there's absolutely nothing bad which will happen to you here. And that'll be it for Dark World Remnants. Yeah, this last level certainly was a doozy, and I'm pretty sure that more than half of these meats were lost into the first section of the level, because yeah, it really diminished a whole lot, but then again, it took me forever to get a good grasp on how to stay alive in a reliable way on the beginning part, because I usually have no attention span when it comes to waiting. In fact, I only got to this one section of the level 3 times, holy shit. And here we go, we've got a chapter which managed to stay shy of the 3 digits death. It may not be an easy chapter, but it certainly was a whole lot easier than many of the chapters that I've been playing lately. Coming up next, the entryway into the gates of hell. Jumper Returns by Autechre.